So here we are, folks, in Alabama, the place of my residence, and walking around another battlefield. Finally got my car back out of the shop. If y'all didn't know, Hurricane Helene, when it came through, it knocked a tree that fell from the sky onto my car, and as an act of God, it cost me a lot of money. But there she is, brand new again. We're gonna take a little walk, talk about Andrew Jackson, talk about Indians, talk about this place behind me called Horseshoe Bend. Follow me. Okay, folks, so as we kind of walk along this little open field, pretty nice little area, pretty wide open, I'm going to try to armchair historian, armchair quarterback, the lead up to all this. So Andrew Jackson, before he was president, actually it was probably about 20 years, about 15 years before he was president. He was a military officer serving with the United States Army, and at the time he was a part of the Tennessee militia. Being that, you know, Jackson lived in Tennessee, he was picked to lead a militia during the War of 1812. So when all that happened with the War of 1812 with the British against the United States, a little skirmish down south, down here in Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi, well, it started kicking off. And what happened is there was a division in the the Native Americans that were down here, and particularly of the Muskogee Nation that lived along Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi. So, well, there were the lower creeks and the upper creeks, and both of these creek nations were a part of the much larger Muskogee Nation. So the lower creeks, well, a proclamation, or not so much a proclamation, but a gesture was granted towards them to kind of Americanize themselves. The lands that were around here, they were getting gobbled up by settlers for westward expansion. Keep in mind that the Louisiana Purchase was probably about 10 years prior to all this. So we had all this new land opened up, and all the settlers were moving out. So they made a deal with them, and the Indians made a deal with the Americans saying that, hey, we'll give you a huge chunk of this land for you guys to settle on if, in return, you don't mess with lands that would be ours forever. And that deal was signed, and so eventually some settlers started moving into this forever Native American land. And well, that got some of these creeks irritated, and they split up. They had a civil war. So the upper creeks that lived in this area, all this, well, they wanted to stick to the ancient ways. They didn't want to become Americanized. The lower creeks, on the other hand, thought, yeah, we'll agree to that. We'll be Americanized. Thought I heard wildlife. Big hole there too. So when this Civil War happened, when these factions started splitting, the lower creeks became allies of the Americas, and the Upper Creeks, well, they wanted to stick to their ways. So a civil war broke out, and that became known as like the Creek War. And it just happened to coincide with the War of 1812. So as we're fighting, most of our forces are dealing with the British in the War of 1812. And when all that's going on, a small band of Native American Creeks, well, they attacked a fort and butchered and slaughtered a bunch of Americans. And in doing so, this angered the United States. So Tennessee, Mississippi, and Georgia all banded together and agreed to send militia down here to deal with these Creek Indians that butchered and attacked the American people. So that began the America's involvement in the Creek War. So the lower Creeks sided with the Americans, and the upper Creeks, well, they weren't very much alone by themselves. So if you kind of go back to modern day history, any of these kind of like proxy wars that we've been running, well, the British joined up with the Northerns. So essentially the War of 1812 and the Creek War kind of melded together. And well, a bunch of fighting happened, a bunch of series of battles happened. The Creek Nation had about 60 small villages, so all these villages would be attacked and attacked and attacked. And leading that force was Andrew Jackson. He commanded the Tennessee militia, so he was all up down this area too, trying to fight and trying to kill. Well, the chief of the Creeks, going uphill now, and the chief of the Creeks, his name was Minowa. And Minowa had a village not located too very much far from here called Tahapika. Well, yeah, like Topeka. And so that was his main headquarters, his kind of like his capital city of his nation. So I'm running out of breath. So long story short, Minowa and Andrew Jackson, well, they were going to meet eventually. And that brings us here, Horseshoe Bend. This is the final place where they met. And it is the penultimate battle of the Creek War. And the immediate battle leading up to the Battle of New Orleans that would give Andrew Jackson his fame and propel him to become our 7th president of the United States. So, yeah, it's all cool. It's all coming full circle, isn't it? I hope you got all that. Have you ever wondered why in most national parks or military parks, why these cannons are always blue? Well, I'll tell you why. I figured it out. So they are blue to pay homage to the French, because the French painted their cannon blue. And if you remember, during the American Revolution, the French gave us a hand in defeating the British. So a lot of their cannon got donated to us, and why paint them? And we actually didn't change the color of these cannons until the Civil War, when they became green. Interesting. So it's here that Andrew Jackson commanded his troops, on this little hill right here, overlooking an area that way. And it was on this very spot at 10:30 in the morning, he directed his cannon and placed on this site right here to fire in that direction towards the Creek Indians, who had a fortification, a huge, about 6 to 8 foot wall of logs and trees and debris and mud and dirt. They made this thing thick, and they stood behind it as a barricade between this spot and the village down below, where the rest of their men and the women and children, they all had a village down there. And if Jackson were to take this particular battle, he would drive all those Creek Indians to surrender and end this war. So this was the spot he had to do it at. So from this spot right here, Jackson placed 2 cannons and fired for 2 hours at that wall, trying to break a hole in it. Trying to break a hole, just keep firing and firing and firing. Because if he sent his men down there, they were certainly, absolutely, positively going to die. So with the cannon on the hill behind me, they were aiming at this general direction over here. You see where those white pickets are? Now that was where the emplacement was, the fortification that the Creek Indians had put up. And they built it that long to stretch the entire length of this open field. And if you recall, the conventional way of fighting an army was to march in. And they didn't know anything about like flanking, or they didn't have like all that cool technology that we have today, like, you know, drop a bomb on them or something like that. No, it wasn't going to happen that way. So they built that barricade, that big long line of wall right there with the trees. They went to the woods and grabbed the trees and just stacked them, piled them high, cut little portholes out so they could shoot through them. And behind that wall was about, let's see, the figures came out to be about 1,000 Creek Indians that were on the site. And so all the able-bodied fighting like men of the Creek Indians were like fortified behind that wall right there. And out of all of them, only 1 in 3 had muskets. The rest of them, your conventional bows and arrows. They had their battle axes and tomahawks and their war clubs. And funny thing about the war club is this band of Indians, they were known as the Red Sticks, and they had war clubs that were painted red, and red signified with their tribe. It was basically their colors, and it also signified the color of war. So these were some fighting dudes. So as the battle kept getting further and further in, with Jackson right behind me, he's firing over that hill onto these guys right here for 2 hours with his cannon. Off in the distance, Jackson, from up on that bluff behind me, he was looking over the treetops and he could see smoke, and he can hear small arms fire, muskets going off in the distance, and he sees smoke. Well, unbeknownst to him, on the other side, well, he knew this part, on the other side, to prevent the guys, the guys that he was fighting, to prevent them from bailing out and retreating and running off or reorganizing, on the other side of the river, he had his colonel. He had a colonel, or yeah, along the river over there with 2 bands of 2 lines, and he was there just to keep them from coming across. Well, in that position back there with that colonel were also the allied Lower Creek Indians, and there was a couple of Lower Creek Indians that thought they were going to miss the battle, and so they slipped out and snuck off and swam across the river and got a couple of canoes and grabbed a couple of more guys, and they commenced to come across to fight. They weren't going to miss it, and that's what that small arms fire was coming from that Jackson heard. And so as soon as Jackson heard that small arms fire, he was immediately, his first thought was, oh my God, the colonel's starting to attack. So Jackson and his troops up here on the hill, Jackson ordered them to fix bayonets and charge this position right here. We're going over the top, boys. So they fixed their bayonets and they charged over. And the first guy to charge over that wall caught a bullet in his head, and his name was Lemuel Montgomery, and they buried him right here. So from the area behind me where that road leads was the village that Manawa established, that he named Tahopeka. And it was from that village that all the women and children of his tribe were laid down and being protected. All the men would rush from that area all the way over here to right there in the middle. You see that's the barricade line. So reinforcements would keep coming up and coming up and coming up. All together, over 1,000 men came to fight. And after Jackson's bayonet charge over that wall, they breached it, and it was hand-to-hand combat. Needless to say, the Creek Indians nobly fought to the bitter end, and out of all of them, the 1,800 were confirmed counted dead. 200 of them, to include Chief Minowa, escaped back towards the village and over the river and down to what would be then Florida, to their allies, the Seminole tribes. And so that's how Minowa got his escape. But extra details about Minowa's escape is as darkness fell, he was among the many bodies that were laying back there of the 800. And when darkness fell, he got up very sneakily, like injured and all. I believe he had 7 wounds. And he got up and slowly made his way in the direction we're walking right now to the river, and made his escape to Florida. So yeah, he ended up getting wounded and feigned his death and snuck out in the darkness. Now we're on our way, walking on this road. We're gonna head down to the actual town village that the Creek Indians had set up, Tahapika, which is down here at the bend of the horseshoe. I kind of scratching my head, and I've always thought this. I'm like, okay, so I understand that rivers were the main highway system back in that era, but why, if the Creeks knew that they were going to make their stand here, why would they put themselves back in a corner of the horseshoe? That, I don't know, that just doesn't get me. But yeah, so there is a hardball road. Let this guy pass real fast. Yeah, you can drive here. You can tune your radio in, and this place is run by the National Park Service, so they got a guided tour via your radio, so you can drive through and stop at certain points and do all that. But lucky for you, you got me and the walking tour and you know, the nickel tour, the dime store adventure. So yeah, we're just gonna make our way that way, and I'll catch you at the next stop. Ew. You know, sadly, I haven't seen any wildlife yet. But, you know, I could be speaking a little too soon here. It has been raining most of the day. Not very hard, but enough to, you know, make the ground wet. Enough to make me wear the old raincoat. But, yeah, they probably burrowed down. But I can see this being a real good place for wildlife to hang out. National park, so they're protected, and yeah, I'm hoping I can see something. Said there's like armadillo and deer, so I don't know, we'll probably catch something around here eventually. Hey, y'all want to get off the beaten path a little bit? Exhibit. So you know that thing I was saying a minute ago about like seeing wildlife? Well, all this deadfall is good old copperhead camo, and that's not the kind of wildlife I like to see, because frankly I hate snakes and I'm scared. So yeah, this exhibit, I just got done reading that a little sign there. So this was the second line of defense, like the final line of defense for the creek. So they chose this this little high ground here to protect what's going on down at the bottom of that hill. So that bottom of that hill is the well, it's basically what's left of the village. So right now we're about halfway between that original defensive fortification line, that barricade, and the river. So this would be kind of like their final place of defense. And I'm gonna hurt myself. I better go slow. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a couple of deer running. Oh, there's more than a couple. I don't know. I just saw a couple more babies join. I don't know if you can see it, but about right there near that road, that gleaming, shining thing over there. Now they're stopping and checking me out, and I'm checking them out. So we got ourselves a standoff. All right, cool. So I'm gonna try to, you know, skirt this little tree line here and make it back to the road. It's either that or backtrack the path to the exhibit. Well, let's go back and let's talk about the numbers. Okay, so the war concluded, or not the war, but the battle here concluded. So the of the 1,000 red stick Indians that were here, 800 of them were counted as dead at the barricade line, and I'm sure many more along this area as well. Not to mention that some of the villagers that were in this village, they ended up getting the better of themselves and fleeing. And as they were jumping in the river, they were sniped from the colonel's troops that were encamped on the other side. So yeah, they had them all surrounded here. Jackson's army and the associated militias, they had this place surrounded pretty well. So now on Jackson's side, they counted 49 that were killed, and then many more were wounded, and then many of those wounded would later on succumb to their wounds, illnesses, infections, and stuff associated. So it took its toll on both sides. Now they were almost completely wiped out, 800 of 1,000, and then of Jackson's 49, he brought 3,000, nearly 4,000 if you add it all up with the Allied Indians. So Jackson had about 4,000, and of those 4,000, 49 perished. So yeah, it's the cost of war, and Jackson was pretty hell-bent on making this one the conclusion of it. He got tired of fighting these guys, so that was his job. So I see the road coming up, so we'll get out of this wet grass. So back to the road we are, and just so happened to be where I came out to the road is the banks of the Tallapoosa River. So the Tallapoosa River etched what is known as the Horseshoe Bend, and this area right here that we're standing in and all that is basically the toe of the horseshoe. So we'll come down off the road here, and I think there's a small clearing that I can see the river at. So let's check that out. All right, so that's the Tallapoosa River, and you see how it's kind of bending. So that's the way it went, the Horseshoe Bend. And on this side that we're walking on, this side of the river, is on the bend itself, and this is the village. So on the other side of the river, on the banks over there, were two lines that formed of Jackson's army. They had one standing right here at the bank, and they basically stretched all the way around this area right here. And so the river bends all the way around like that. So they stretched out like shoulder to shoulder around that river. And as the Creek Indians were retreating towards the river, they jumped in and were trying to seek safety and seek a way out. And waiting on the other side over there was Jackson's army, shooting them dead in the river. And so they say that all the ground here was red, and even the river was running red with blood. So yeah, it was a massacre here. Yeah, there goes them deer again. I guess they crossed the field where I was at. There's a truck coming, so they probably got spooked by the truck, but they're heading over into the woods where I was walking a minute ago when I first saw them. Awesome. Well, I'm at the most southern end of this park, and my car is on the most northern end of this park. And this park is about 100+ acres, and I got a lot of walking to do. So I'm about 30% battery, and this place is like the early 1800s and nothing to charge it with. So I'm gonna brave on, avoid any snakes, exit through the gift shop, charge my GoPro. So I guess with that being said, this episode's history.